So this will be my second attempt at a response to Mr. Cropper about telepathy. I just uploaded a video response, and it was a direct upload. It got chopped in half, so I'm going to try again. Mr. Cropper was arguing against the idea that if telepathy turns out to be real, that somehow proves the existence of God. And, I don't know where he would get the idea that these two things are in any way related. It seems like a non sequitur to me. I'm guessing he had a conversation with some unnamed woman who was arguing that if telepathy is real, then God exists. But I don't see how that argument would work exactly. So in that sense, I agree with Mr. Cropper. It just sort of seems like an irrelevant point, really. To stick to telepathy itself, what I'd rather talk about is synchronicity, so not at least sticking to telepathy itself, but synchronicity is, I think, a wider, more general phenomenon which includes telepathy. Synchronicity is a term coined by the psychologist Carl Jung, which basically refers to an experience of an acausal correspondence between one's own psychological existence and the so-called external world. Jung gives an example of a time when he was listening to a patient recount a dream in which they dreamt of a scarab beetle, and they were going back and forth, Jung and his patient, trying to figure out the meaning of this beetle. And then there was a tapping on the window in Dr. Jung's office, and he opened it up, and in flew a scarab beetle. And mind you, I believe this was in Switzerland, and it's not as though scarab beetles are common in that area. So, Dr. Jung said to his patient, "Here's your beetle." And I think we've all had instances where such coincidences occur, though they're not mere coincidences, at least not for us personally. They're in fact meaningful, seemingly purposeful coincidences that, in one way or another, solve some internal conflict. They provide insight where there had been ignorance, but somehow these coincidences, these synchronicities, these meaningful coincidences, bring us into alignment with a new sort of knowledge which we had lacked prior. Well, even if that knowledge is just that the universe is meaningful, because it's not just something that I project. Meaning isn't just something I project onto the universe, but in fact, the universe responds to me in this synchronistic way, such that these coincidences, which aren't mere coincidences, but in fact meaningful coincidences, are possible. Another thing that you mentioned, Mr. Cropper, was the possibility of telepathy, or as I'm framing it, synchronicity, the possibility that these are somehow evidence for the soul. And I would say that for any sort of communication, even just speaking face to face, or mediated by this communications technology here, the existence of the soul is sort of a prerequisite. And perhaps we should use a more modern, in some sense more modern term, the psyche, though psyche is just a Greek word that means soul. But there is a science called psychology that studies psychological phenomena. So, of course, there's a soul, there's a psyche, and we don't need telepathy to have evidence for this. I think our own first-person experience, our own desires, our imaginations, our dreams, the archetypes and symbols and unconscious structuring principles that shape our experience, these are all evidence enough, for me at least, that there is some reality to the psyche. I wouldn't want to commit myself to some sort of a metaphysical dualism between soul and body, or between the psyche and matter, but there's obviously a phenomenological difference. There's a distinction we can make between psychological phenomena and material phenomena. And there are different methods which we use to study each of them. And I don't think we will ever be able to understand psychological phenomena in terms of the mechanisms which work so well in helping us to understand the material world. The psyche seems to be of a different order, and if you want to come to know something, you've got to use a method adequate to that thing that you'd like to know. So there are psychological methods and there are material methods, and each produces a different sort of knowledge, and we shouldn't expect to reduce all phenomena to matter in motion, because we are not only material physical bodies, but we are psychological beings that have first-person experiences, and certainly our experiences, our psychological being is related to our body, but exactly how this relation plays itself out is something that requires ongoing research, and research that I don't think will be very fruitful if it's reductionistic, in a sense that it's trying to find a way to reduce all of the psyche to its physiological components. Again, I'm not trying to institute some sort of metaphysical dualism here. I'm just saying, phenomenologically speaking, just based on how we experience these things, psyche is different than matter, and they both seem irreducible one to the other. And I guess this is where synchronicity is so interesting to me, in that it seems to bridge the gap between our own internal psychological experience and experience of the so-called external world. It would seem then that this distinction, this apparent distinction between the internal and the external, is just that. It's apparent, not real. How these things really relate is quite a mystery, and I think it deserves serious thought by all philosophers, and certainly scientists are the ones that will be able to do neuroscience and study the neurochemical patterns and behaviors of the brain, but I don't think that's ever going to completely explain psychological phenomena to us, because psychological phenomena are not objective, or at least not objective in the sense that you can step outside and look at them. You are a psyche, and you're never going to get an objective view of your own being. And so in that sense, to study the psyche necessarily involves contemplation and introspection and meditation, turning inward, in other words, whereas scientific investigation looks outward in order to measure and objectify. I think psychology will always, in part, involve turning inward. Though again, there's a bridge between the inward and the outward, not just synchronicity, but the second person. Science is the third person, and a purely introspective psychology is the first person. The second person is, say, when a psychoanalyst is relating to their patient, they're trying to develop this intersubjective space of a communion between subjects. And I think much can be learned about the psyche and about the world in which it exists through a second person methodology. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks for listening, and let me know what you think.